Good morning and welcome to another edition of the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer who killed George Floyd, would rather spend 25 years in federal prison than 15 in a state penitentiary. The disgraced cop or ex-cop who infamously kneeled on Floyd's neck for more than 9.5 minutes pleaded guilty on Wednesday, December 15th to federal charges of violating George Floyd's civil rights. Federal prosecutors reached a deal with Chauvin, who agreed to serve 25 years in federal prison. The sentence will run concurrently with the 22-year sentence Chauvin received after being convicted on state charges of murder. Under the state sentence, Chauvin would have qualified for parole after 15 years. So is federal prison that much easier than the state penitentiary? Well, we discussed this morning. But first, let's tackle the news headlines of the morning. The three white men convicted of killing unarmed jogger Ahmad Aubury will be sentenced next month. Georgia Judge Timothy Walmsley, who presided over the high-profile November trial of father and son Greg and Travis McMichael and their neighbor William Rowdy Bryant, has scheduled the trio's sentencing for January 7th. According to his order signed yesterday, all three men face a minimum of life in prison, but Walmsley will decide whether they can be considered for parole after 30 years. Travis McMichael, who is 35 years old, Gregory McMichael, 65, and Rowdy Bryant, 52, were tried together in the February 2020 murder of Aubury, who was fatally shot by the younger McMichael in a mostly white neighborhood just outside Brunswick, as the trio falsely claimed that the 25-year-old Aubury had committed a crime. The McMichaels and Bryant were each charged with malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, false imprisonment, and criminal attempt to commit false imprisonment. So the sentencing for those three men are set for January 7th. Also in the news this morning, Ilhan Omar. Well, when Republican Lauren Boebert cracked a racist Islamophobic joke about the Democratic rep, it wasn't the first time she mocked the Muslim congresswoman from Minnesota. Boebert had derided Omar during a House floor debate last month, taunting her as a member of the, quote, jihad squad of liberal lawmakers. The House this week, I should say, took the first formal step at a response with a 219 to 212 party line vote. They approved legislation sponsored by Representative Omar that would establish a new special envoy position at the State Department to monitor and combat Islamophobia worldwide. And when she introduced the debate, or when he introduced the debate, I should say, Representative James McGovern, the Democratic chairman of the House Rules Committee, cited surveys that showed an uptick in anti-Muslim sentiment nationwide and around the world. He also showed the need for an energetic U.S. response. Democrats are now demanding harsh actions against lawmakers and others who cross the line. Sad news, the report from yesterday, Bell Hooks, a trailblazing Black feminist whose writings anticipated and helped shape ongoing debates about race, gender, and class in the United States, has died at her home in Kentucky. She was 69 years old. Her death was confirmed in a statement Wednesday by Berea College, where she was a distinguished professor in residence in Appalachian Studies. The school did not release additional details, but she was raised in a racially segregated town in rural Kentucky. Dr. Hooks rose to become one of the most prominent feminist writers and theorists of her generation. A poet, memorist, social critic, and professor, she wrote more than 30 books, mixing the personal and the political in essays that examine Madonna music videos, Clarence Thomas's Supreme Court confirmation hearing, the representation of Black Americans in film, and the nature of love. Her work was credited with redefining feminism, broadening a movement that was often viewed as primarily serving white, middle, and upper class mothers and wives. Dr. Hook was born Gloria Jean Watkins and used Bell Hooks as a pseudonym. adopting the name of a maternal great-grandmother and styling it lowercase. She said she wanted to focus attention on her work, not on herself, while also paying homage to a relative with whom she shared an independent cast of mind. Bell Hooks has died at the age of 69. Also in the news this morning, prime time. Deion Sanders and Jackson State have pulled off a signing day shocker. Travis Hunter, Rival.com's #1 player in the class of 2022, announced that he has committed to play for Jackson State. Hunter, a two-way player, was committed to Florida State since March of 2020. There was also speculation that he, a Georgia native, could flip his decision to the in-state Bulldogs. Instead, he will play for Coach Prime at Jackson State, an HBCU located in Jackson, Mississippi. Sanders, of course, was a star at Florida State before embarking on a Hall of Fame NFL career. He also, if you remember, played baseball. Now he has pulled off arguably the biggest recruiting surprise in recent memory at his alma mater's expense. Hunter announced his decision during a ceremony at his school early Wednesday afternoon. He had Florida State, Georgia, and Auburn hats in front of him, but dramatically threw those to the side and had his mother toss him a Jackson State hat to make it official. He then unzipped his jacket to reveal a Jackson State t-shirt. He said, historically Black colleges and universities have a rich history in football. I want to be a part of that history and more. I want to be part of that future. I am making this decision so that I can light the way for others to follow, make it a little easier for the next player to recognize that HBCUs may be everything you want and more. So congratulations to that young man. Congratulations to Coach Prime as he makes his mark down there in his state of Mississippi. Again, Dr. Chovin, just so our viewers will know, is traveling today. We won't have him join us this morning. Well, Derek Chauvin chose a long federal prison over what would have been a shorter penitentiary stay. Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer who killed George Floyd, pleaded guilty yesterday to federal civil rights charges that he violated the rights of George Floyd and agreed to serve 25 years in prison. Let us talk about that this morning with our guests. From Insight News right there in Minneapolis is Al McFarlane, and also our regular contributor from the Washington Informer, James Wright. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
So, Al, let me start with you. 25 years, he said, you know what, give me the federal time. I don't want this state time. What's the significance?
Well, two things. Obviously less time, but the second thing is where you do that time. The question is whether under the state guidelines, he and his attorneys felt he'd be safe being in prisons here in Minnesota, where there are likely people that he put in prison through his work as a law enforcement officer. And I'm thinking that they decided and made the bid to accept the federal charges with the idea that they likely would be able to be in the federal system, meaning he could be detained, incarcerated in any number of facilities around the country, in most cases away from any risk or perceived risk of retribution by people that he may have had personal direct contact with. Two things come to mind, though, when I read and heard and watched the announcement that he was going to change his plea to enter a guilty plea in the federal court. The question comes up, has he had some kind of Damascus moment? Was he on the road, and knocked off his mule, and did he see the light? And the light instructed him to repent and to stop being the persecutor of human beings. That's one scenario. It's kind of a biblical scenario that our people certainly understand. Or is it a different reasoning behind the strategy of accepting the deal with the feds? I think most people will consider the Damascus idea and then say, no, I don't think so. This is probably a practical decision, and a decision based on both fear of retribution and a desire to be free or less exposed to retribution, but also to have less time at the end of the day, which is being offered by the federal charges.
And James, you know, Felonious Floyd, George Floyd's brother, said, you know, he could have did this last year, spared us all of the trial, spared us all of everything else that has happened since he murdered George Floyd. Why now, James?
Well, we have to look at the fact about the type of guy Derek Chauvin is. First of all, Stacey and Al, I really question deep in his heart whether he really thinks he murdered George Floyd, and whether he thinks he's in a twilight zone because this isn't real, because I was, quote, doing my job. And getting to Al's point about going to the federal system, there is a perception among many people that the federal system is easier than the state system. Al pointed out that he may run into some people in the state system that he had previously helped get incarcerated, and that wouldn't turn out good for him. And that is definitely true. So his perception is that if he goes to federal prison system, he will be with a higher class of inmates who are more sophisticated and more cultured, I guess, and that he won't have to deal with a lot of the problems that he would have with the state system. Maybe he could, you know, fit in and in a country club type of prison setting. That's what he is thinking. And he is thinking that because he's white, and because he's white, he's entitled to the best of the prison system that has to offer. Of course, all of us know that's not going to be the case. And in many cases, federal facilities are worse than some state facilities. So Derek Chauvin needs to have a come home to Jesus moment. He has not had that, because if you look at his reaction during the proceedings, he was still like in a twilight zone. Like, am I really here? I didn't do anything wrong. And I really think that is his psychological impression.
And Al, you know, Bobby Henry of the West Side Gazette in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, writes that state prisons can be rough, and weak individuals like Derek Chauvin, or rough on weak individuals like Derek Chauvin. There's a perception, right? And I think James tackled it a little bit, that federal prison is probably a lot less, or put it this way, more safe than state prison. Do you think that may have been the part of his team's thinking?
I think for sure it is. I think there's a sense that there's imminent and likely danger being in a Minnesota prison. You know, we raised the question of people in prison that have life sentences. And as I said before the show, a life sentence, though you are incarcerated, also suggests a certain freedom. A person with the life sentence can't get 2 life sentences or 3. It doesn't matter. And so there's the risk of someone who feels he has nothing else to lose, and who may feel his own sense of redemption to the cause, whatever the cause may be, might be retribution. And so I think that's a real concern. And I think for that reason, he did want to be out of Minnesota and somewhere in the federal system. I don't know if it's, as James was saying, this idea that the feds have these country club opportunities. I think there may be, but I think at the end of the day, prison is prison. Incarceration is incarceration, and that's what this man is going to experience. What's important to me, and this is the statement from the brother of George Floyd, that this could have been done years ago. I think in 2017,
Yes.
he was charged. In this case, in the federal case, the sentence also was because he did the same thing to a 17 or 14-year-old boy.
Yes.
He answered a domestic abuse situation where a mom called the cops about her 14-year-old boy who had assaulted him. The cops arrived, cops in this case being Derek Chauvin again, and a applied the same kind of pressure, choking this 14-year-old and then putting him on the ground face down like George Floyd and having his knee in that kid's neck and back for over 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean? It means that this guy has practiced this maneuver.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how many other people have been victimized the same way. And I think going to a full trial would have brought out an aggressive examination of a history of failed humanity on the part of Derek Chauvin, a history of depravity and a history of lawlessness under the color of law. And I think that's one of the reasons they chose to accept the plea deal with the feds with 2 charges, but not open up what could have been teens, tens or more charges. I do remember in the course of the trial statements saying that he's been charged, but never found, never formally punished by the Department of the Minneapolis Police, but he's been charged before for abusive behavior, police brutality. So here we go.
And Al and James, what Al just brought out was something interesting. The underlying thing here is that it's not just Derek Chauvin, right? Minnesota, like other police departments, Minneapolis, I should say, they have a problem, right? It can't just be Derek Chauvin putting his knee in suspects or individuals' backs or necks, right? It has to be other officers doing that. We know that 3 other officers who was at the scene of the murder of George Floyd are being tried next month in federal court as well. But it has to be a mentality, not just a one-man thing, right?
There's an entitlement. There's a sense of entitlement that officers have. That's the reason Minnesotans and others are calling for changes in it's called, I think, limited liability. What's the right word for it? But laws and processes that limit the liability that officers have.
Qualified immunity.
Qualified immunity. That's the term I'm looking for. And so that's being challenged. And the question is, should officers be required to carry insurance, personal liability insurance, the same way doctors are, the same way lawyers are, and that they have to be accountable for their specific actions? Right now, there are not. There is a culture, and there has been a culture of supporting and writing off abusive, aggressive, illegal, immoral behavior by law enforcement personnel. That's what's under scrutiny right now. We're also having the trial as we speak of the Potter, is the former officer in Brooklyn Park. Kim Potter, in the death of Dante Wright. Another case of the community is saying unlawful and inappropriate use of force resulting in the death of a Black man. It's not a one of. Our community and mass media over the years had wanted us to believe when these things happen, they were aberrations. We know from the Black community that this is part and parcel of the challenge we all face every day under the system of white supremacy. Our lives have always been at risk, and we know that.
Yeah, I want to call attention to David Youngblood and Bobby Henry. David Youngblood, obviously, he's experienced. He has a lot of legal training, if you will. But he says time is better in the federal prison, and Bobby says he disagrees that with us. He says all prisons are not created equal. So, with that, James, is Chauvin gonna have a much easier time? How do we qualify that?
My impression is that he is not going to have a much easier time, because I think he's just going to go to if I can use the term, regular facility. He's not going to go to one of these country club facilities that congressmen and high-level CEOs and people like Martha Stewart have gone to. He's going to go to a real facility because he's not as wealthy and prominent. And so he's going to have to deal with all of the issues that those prisoners have to deal with. And he may, as I said earlier, off camera, he have to join one of those white supremacist gangs in order to survive for protection. And, this is all fascinating because this took place in Minneapolis. Stacey, as you know, Minneapolis has this reputation as a liberal bastion. We think about Hubert Humphrey and Walter Mondale, as well as Keith Ellison. And many of us who don't live in Minneapolis think that it's just this liberal bastion of people where everybody gets along and everything is great. And this was a revelation when all of this came into being. And so I think what we have to understand is that Chauvin hid behind this blue wall, just like when he goes to his little prison, he's going to hide behind a white wall, and he tried to. And so that blue wall even penetrates a very blue Minneapolis, which I find just totally fascinating.
Well, Al, you've been in Minneapolis. You're in Minneapolis. You cover Minneapolis like nobody else. What's the sense there in Minneapolis? We heard from the Floyd family yesterday, but what's the overall sense? You got, like you said, the former officer Kim Potter's on trial right now for shooting Daunte Wright. Of course, the Chauvin situation that we've been discussing. What's the feeling in Minneapolis today?
I think Minneapolis is self-aware that as a community, it is under a global microscope, that things that are happening here, that are unfolding here, that are being revealed here, are being revealed not only to the citizens and residents of our community, but at the same time are being shown across the globe. The question of democracy, the question of freedom, the question of the rule of law, all of those now on the table for examination. It's as if the curtain at Oz has been pulled back, and now Minneapolis and St. Paul Black communities and white communities can look at the machinations of the Great Deception. The Great Deception is that this is a liberal bastion in which people are free to be themselves and have opportunity. The truth is, Minnesota has among the worst disparities in education outcomes, in wealth creation, in home ownership, in health, and in employment, anywhere, in housing, anywhere in the country. And so there's an image system that's successful in creating this idyllic picture of Minneapolis. There's a reality that has been revealed, and it's been revealed primarily through the George Floyd incident. That's why this is so important. Now the world sees how the system works, the process works, and Minneapolis is ground zero. People here really are conscious and aware that what is unfolding not only here, but in the world. And I think that empowers and enables people to be free to speak in ways they have not before, and to be insistent. So one of the big stories here, and it's in our paper coming up Monday, is a young man last year was going into a local bank and tried to cash his payroll check. The bank officer thought the check was forged. Of course, the young man was a 23-year-old Black young man working for a major retailer here, and called the community cops. They came in, put this guy in handcuffs, paraded him through the bank, made the guy feel like he was a criminal. And as it turned out, the check obviously was bona fide, the document was real, and the bank manager said that they did nothing wrong and race had nothing to do with it. That's being challenged. And so there is this reckoning taking place, and it's happening here and happening around the country at the same time.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like I said, it's like the veil has been unveiled, you know. And when you think of Minneapolis, and James, you brought up some interesting names from the past, and you think of Minneapolis, you know, prior to all of this, you didn't think of Minneapolis in the light of being ground zero for even the Black Lives Matter going global. Because of the George Floyd incident, it went global.
Yes, it went global. And I believe, and Al can correct me on this, there was an incident, I believe it was Minneapolis, where a cop shot and killed a young man right in front of his baby. I believe that was Minneapolis.
Fernando Castile, a suburb of Minneapolis.
Yes, a suburb,
Mm-hmm.
still within that area. And that's interesting because, and you alluded to it, Al, and thank you for saying this, but Minneapolis, St. Paul really worked hard in terms of pushing themselves forward as a progressive communities. You've had Keith Ellison represent that area in Congress. You now have the lady there who's being
Ilhan Omar.
right, that's being persecuted by this crazy woman from Colorado. So it just goes to show you, like Malcolm X said, everything south of Canada is not good for Black people.
Now, look, well, Dr. Chavis is not here this morning. You're taking Dr. Chavis's place, James. That's what he would say. Al, so the 3 officers that was with Derek Chauvin, they stand trial next month. Let me ask you this. Suppose, let's look at it this way. Suppose they are acquitted. Will we have the same, for lack of a better term, and to use the street term, will we have the same smoke that it was for Derek Chauvin?
There's a continuum of softening, I believe. This is my analysis going on right now. Here's what I mean. Fernando Castile, the settlement was $4 million. Young man lost his life. His girlfriend famously had the presence of mind to broadcast that murder as it happened. And the tragedy is that their child was sitting in the back seat of the car. That officer prosecuted, but not convicted. To my understanding, is probably somewhere else in the Southwest working in law enforcement. I'm not sure of that. But $4 million was the settlement. Then a Black officer kills a white woman. The officer is Somali, and an incident where a woman comes into the alley, taps on the back of the police car. She had called the cops saying she thought there was an assault going on in her alley. And when they came there to investigate, she came out of her house, tapped on the back of the car. Officer says, startled and wanting to defend his partner driving the car, shot and killed the woman. That settlement was $20 million. A white woman, an Australian woman who lived here in Twin Cities, and a conviction of the officer on 2nd degree, I think, then eventually 3rd degree murder. His initial charges were 2nd degree and 3rd degree. The charges were on appeal reduced to 3rd degree. Our sense, the community sense, is that the reducing of the charges against the officer foreshadowed the potential reduction of charges against Derek Chauvin, that there's a trade-off in this scheme of things. And so the difference is, though, when $20 million was provided to the family of, I think Christine Damon was her name, then the George Floyd family got about $25 million in their settlement against the city of Minneapolis, the police department. And so there's this flux, right? And what will happen, the state appears to be, the community appears to be being equally tough on everybody that's acting in a way of willful disregard of human life. And if that's the case, if these men who are also charged can say and prove that they were not willing and active participants in the actual murder, there's a public sense that they may get a lesser charge, a lesser, consequence. So that's kind of the story.
Yeah, Al, and James, real quick, as we run out of time, but Chauvin pleading guilty, that means that he's not going to stand trial with those 3 officers on the federal charge. That helps them, doesn't it?
It does help them, and it's interesting that you say that, because the Chauvin's defense attorneys actually did their job in terms of helping him get as light of a sentence as possible. We don't like it, but they did their job, and that's what they're supposed to do. But again, I think Chauvin is leaning on the blue wall. And one of those officers that's been charged, I think, worked for DC at some point. And but this is countrywide in terms of this blue wall, and Derek Chauvin is still leaning on the blue wall to get him over.
Here's what Keith Ellison said in the story.
I'm sorry, Al, 30 seconds or less if you can. We're running out of time.
He mainly said that Chauvin today admitted his guilt in open court, and he called it an important and historic decision. The admission marks another important moment of accountability and another step on the road to justice. So that's Keith Ellison.
Wow. Well, we're going to continue to follow this. We really appreciate Al McFarlane. Y'all can check him out on this Black Press USA and YouTube, Black Press USA TV. What time, Al? Every day?
Every day at 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock Central, yeah.
1 o'clock Central. And of course, he does a fabulous job keeping his finger on the pulse with Insight News out in Minneapolis. James Wright, of course, of the Washington Informer. The NNPA's Midwinter Training Conference kicks off January 19th. Again, we'll be at the Diplomat Beach Resort in Hollywood, Florida. Hopefully, Al will be there through the 22nd, where the theme is the publishing industry, advancing the Black press of America, reaffirming, engaging, and empowering. We're inviting everyone to come. Visit www.nnpa-events.com to register and reserve your hotel room at the beautiful Diplomat Resort. Our Black fact of the day, our Black newspaper fact of the day, the longest running African-American family-owned paper in the United States, the Baltimore Afro-American, was established in 1892. The newspaper rose to national prominence under editor Carl J. Murphy, started in 1922. And in 1941, Vincent Tubbs, who later was one of the few Black war correspondents during World War II and the managing editor of Jet magazine, was assigned to cover lynchings, often traveling to remote locations in the South. Today, our Black newspaper fact is the Baltimore Afro-American. Black news, Black history, American history, world history. That's the Black press of America. Thank you for joining us. We will see you tomorrow.